Hey, good morning, Fanus. Time for another adult Sunday school lecture. We're almost done with this, I'm thinking, hoping, praying. Maybe one more for me, then we'll be back in our Sunday school classes and you can be bored by someone new. So I do really want to thank you for listening and the comments you've made. It's been an interesting time, but anyhow, all that later on. So we've been studying David, we're moving into Solomon. Today we're going to be looking at Solomon's wisdom and kind of the building of the temple and kind of the highlight of Solomon's life, the good old days, so to speak. Next week we'll kind of look at the downfall. But anyhow, so quickly, Jerusalem. Now, when David took that over with his private soldiers, we talked about this. He took it over. That's why it was called the City of David. He took it over with his private army, really before he was king. But once he became king, he established Jerusalem as the center of the throne. That's where the power would emanate from in Jerusalem. And really did that pretty quickly. I mean, if you think about it, step back. So David establishes Jerusalem as the center of power. The other thing he does, or at least begins the process of, God doesn't allow him to finish it, is establish Jerusalem as the center of religious power also. He brings the ark there, sets up the priesthood again, and it would be Solomon who would actually build the temple. So when you fast forward to the Jews being taken into captivity, it's to Jerusalem they're going to be looking back towards as the center of the throne, the Davidic kingdom, and also the center of religious rites and ceremonies. You know, you look at Samuel, which is the guy that inaugurated or anointed David and Saul. He went around the countryside to various shrines in these high places, and that's where he sacrificed and worshiped God. And these high places initially were just places where you could go worship. There was an ark there, a shrine of some sort. You know, it goes all the way back to Abraham and Jacob and all these guys. But as the kingdom develops and the temple is built, those places kind of fall out of favor, and you're supposed to worship at the temple. And this is going to become a source of issue once the kingdom split and the people are brought back. They're taken into captivity. The tribes of Judah are brought back with Nehemiah and Ezra. They will build another temple. And it's going to be a source of issues between them and the Samaritan people and the other tribes from the Israel, 10 other tribes that would come back. It won't go away quickly. You'll see it continuing to be a problem even all the way up to John 4. And you think about Jesus when he meets a woman at the well. You know, she's a Samaritan. And she talks about this well being a well that was given to Jacob. And it's a place where they still worship, 700 or 800 years later, actually longer than that. Later, they're still worshiping there. Still a source of contention between the good Jews who worship in Jerusalem at the temple and the Samaritans and kind of half Jews that still worship in the high places. Matter of fact, it will always kind of be a designation on whether a king is good or not, whether he tries to tear down the Baal, Asherah poles and Baal worship that's in the high places. But that all happens pretty quick. I mean, you think about it from Samuel to David to Solomon, suddenly everything's gone from kind of worshiping throughout, Israel to only in Jerusalem. And anytime something happens that quickly, some seeds can be sown that will later on bear some bad fruit. And we'll see that, with Solomon and afterwards as the kingdom begins to disintegrate and eventually as the rebellion splits. But we'll talk about that more next week. So anyhow, this week is more Solomon and his wisdom, how he got it, how he used it, and the building of the temple. And I thought, it's May. People are graduating all over the place. So I thought, I was reading online trying to get some ideas, and I found a guy talking about what if Solomon gave the commencement address. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty good idea. I mean, he's the wisest guy that ever lived. Not a wise guy, but a wisest man. Other than Jesus, maybe one of the most intelligent men to ever live. So he could give some great advice, right? So I thought, today I'm going to do a speech. I'm going to act like I'm Solomon. I'm not a very good actor, so it'll really just be me. But, we're going to go with that. So with that in mind, let's get started. So anyhow, today, they would introduce Solomon. They would talk about him being a child prodigy. And, the guy who built the temple, oversaw some major projects, did works in almost every field. Excuse me, really a Renaissance man before the Renaissance. So as soon as Solomon can get on his regalia, he'll be up here to regale you. I like that. Luckily my son left all his graduation stuff here. and because he doesn't really care about that. So I've got all these ropes and ribbons and things that he had, and they look really good. Don't know what a lot of them. I think one of them here is a participation trophy from kindergarten. Participation trophies, we make a lot of fun of the millennials having these participation trophies, but in reality, it's us to give it to them. What kindergartner isn't going to take something? So anyhow, without further ado, I give you Solomon today. Put the hat on, just got my hair cut, so I'm not really worried about it getting too messed up. It's been a long time since I graduated. But anyhow, I'd like to take a moment and just recognize what you kids have done. You've worked very hard over the last 4, 5, 6 years, as long as your parents would keep paying. Hopefully you don't have a lot of debt. If you do, you need to read some of my books and try to figure out, how to get out of debt. But, I'd like to thank the parents here today. I'd like to thank the professors and the teachers and the faculty here at this college for inviting me. Mostly, I would like to thank Bill and Ted for bringing me here in their time-traveling phone booth. And it's a most excellent adventure, I must say. So anyhow, this is a Christian university, so I'm assuming you know who I am and you've read some of my material. So let me just give you some quick points, and then I'll get into kind of, some deeper points about some of the things that I did. So first off, these are just easy to walk away. You're paying attention now. You may not be paying attention here in a little bit, but right now, of course, you are. Maybe. So some easy walkaways. Don't ask too many questions about how your mom and dad got together. You might not really want to know the answer, right? So that's an easy one. And as many of you are young, you may be doing some writing. I understand there's this thing called social media. Don't really know what it is. But be careful what you write, because you never know. It might get published into a book and later on come to embarrass you. So if you're in love and you want to write love letters to your wife or your girlfriend, it's really never a good idea to compare any woman's hair to a goat's hair. It just doesn't go over very well with women. So, keep that in mind. When you're writing things, just remember, hey, this may get into print one of these days. So that's another takeaway. Just be careful what you write these days, because nothing ever goes away. Third thing, don't ever trust a woman that's willing to take half a baby. Because most of you know that story about me, how the women came and said, this is my baby. And I said, well, let's cut it in half. One woman said, okay, I'll take that. Don't trust that woman. Don't trust anybody, really, that's ready to take half a baby. And remember, if you have more than one wife, I don't really know if that's legal here, maybe in Utah, that's it. But just remember, for every wife you get, you get a mother-in-law too. So keep that in mind. So those are just some easy takeaways. If you fall asleep, can't make it through the rest of that, you have that to walk out of here with. So the real stuff. So my advice to you about how to go through your life. First of all, listen to your parents. What did my dad tell me? Well, he said, be strong, be a man, and grow up. In other words, don't live in the basement and play video games for the next 10 years. Be strong, be a man, grow up, and get out to do things. Walk in the ways and rules of your God. Now, you may look at your parents and say, they've told me that, but they're hypocrites. All parents are hypocrites. You're a hypocrite, I'm a hypocrite. But, we got to realize that, but we've got to realize their intentions are right. Listen to your parents. Maybe listen to what they say. Don't always necessarily look at the way they lived. I mean, my dad made some pretty big mistakes, but yet he's still called the man after God's own heart, right? So, when you think about wisdom, because that's what I'm known for, and I want to talk a little bit about that. How you come about that? There's a guy that will live after me, but before you, named Marcus Aurelius. Now, Marcus Aurelius kind of boiled things down, and he talked about a thing called first principles. So what is that? Well, it's a simple, but it's a very amazingly effective technique for cutting through, big-time problems. What Marcus Aurelius said with the first things, or first principles, was to ask of each thing, what is it in itself? What causes it? So that's the key to wisdom. You take away all the dross, all the extra stuff, and you say, what is this thing in its essential nature? That's the key to wisdom. You can know a lot of things about something, but do you know those essential things that make it? Wealth, success, intelligence, all can be boiled down to that. You look at something and you say, what is the essential nature of this? What is the way that God has made this? What is it, the purpose that he has given? That's your first steps towards success. If you take the time to boil things down to that essential problem, you can begin to show wisdom. In other words, think about it. Wisdom, knowledge, right? Well, knowledge is the first step in wisdom, but it's not the only step. The difference between knowledge and wisdom, as I've heard, is to know that the tomato is a fruit, right? But you don't want to make a cobbler out of it. That's wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that it's a fruit. Wisdom is saying, yeah, but it's not going to be good in a cobbler. So there's kind of that difference. So what's the beginning of wisdom? Well, it's the fear of the Lord. That's what I write early on in one of my big bestsellers, the book of Proverbs. What do I mean by the beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord, or the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord? Is that some abject, cowering fear? Of course it isn't. No, it's beginning to love God, to respect God, to know who God is. This leads us to knowing God. When we approach things with the careful and well thought out approach, especially God, when we approach him in a worshipful manner, we understand that God will give us wisdom. He'll give us knowledge. So don't ask for wealth. Don't ask for a long life. This is what I did. First things first, I was able to boil it down and said, I don't necessarily want wealth or a long life or power. I want wisdom, because I knew that if God gave me wisdom, all those other things would fall in line. And I approached God in the right way, and I was able to get that. So ask for an understanding mind from God and the ability to discern good and evil. You guys are young, you got a lot of ideas, but you need to understand how to put it into place. So when I was young, I was given a big project to build this temple to worship God at. So what did I do? Well, the first thing I did was to begin to prepare myself. I made sure that I was in the right place and doing the right thing. So what do? You prepare yourself. How do you do that? Well, you get to wherever you got to be, get there early in case things changes. If you're showing up just on time or even a minute or two late, number one, it's not showing respect for whoever you're meeting. And number two, if things have changed, you don't have time to be quick on your feet and make those type of changes. So get there early in case the plans change. So when I went to Gibeon, I got there earlier. Consult the higher powers. So that's why I went to Gibeon. This is number two. Consult people, or in this case God, who knows way more than I do. So I went to Gibeon. I went there to ask him how to go about building this temple and ask him for wisdom. Why did I do that? Well, this is number three. Know your weaknesses. I knew my weakness. I was a young man. There were people who were questioning how I'd been put in power. There were already some things that had gone wrong. And this was a huge deal. God had said to my father, I won't let you build this temple, but I will let your son build it. So I knew that this was important, but I knew my weaknesses. So I knew that I needed to go to God first to get this. And then I took advantages of my strengths, what I did have, what I had learned, what I learned from my father and other people. I knew that I needed wisdom. I knew one strength that I had was I had boiled down all these things, first things first, and knew to ask God. So that's how you prepare yourself. You make sure that you are prepared before you go into one of these projects. And the second thing you do, make sure everything else is prepared. If you're prepared and everything else isn't ready, well, then you're just kind of standing there getting frustrated. So you're going into a project before. You make sure. How do you make sure everything else is prepared? While you're getting yourself prepared, make sure to gather all the necessary resources. Bring them. Get them to where they need to be. Make sure there. It never hurts to over-prepare. No one has ever said, man, I just really over-prepared for that and it really hurt me. No one says that. I know that, right? So just do that. Know the full picture. So when I looked at this temple, I knew that I had to build a temple not to contain God, right? Because that isn't what I was doing. That isn't what God wanted me to do. I knew that this temple needed to be a place where myself and my people could come and enjoy the presence of God. So yes, it needed to be beautiful. Yes, it needed to be that, but it also needed to be functional. When you look at the work that went in on the Ark of the Covenant and the room for the Holy of Holies and these type of things, we prepared a place where people could come and enjoy the presence of God. Next thing, hire the best people. This is why I went to Hiram, king of Tyre. The Phoenicians were world renowned for their skills and their abilities. So I went to him, hired the best people. So prepare yourself, then prepare everything else along the way. Know your weaknesses, know your strengths, do all your gathering beforehand, hire the best people, these type of things. So what's third? Don't forget to celebrate when it's over. So you prepared yourself, you prepared everything else, and then you build it, and it gets done. Don't forget to celebrate when it's over. But, don't forget to thank those who are responsible in this celebration. You need to make sure to share the credit. Don't make it about you. You may have been the person doing it and the brains behind it, but it wouldn't have happened without other people to do that. And so what I did when I was done is I reminded the people, yes, we all built this, but who was really responsible? God was. So in my prayer, when we were celebrating the building of the temple, I reminded people of my father, the promise that God had made to my father, and I reminded them of all of other God's promises to us as a people. Keep it simple, right? So don't forget to thank everybody, but then keep it simple, kind of like I'm keeping this speech simple today. My prayer that day was aimed at one point, and that point was that God was present. He was present amongst us and amongst his people. And he always will be if his people come to him with the right attitude. So when you come to this situation or other situations in your life and you come to God in the proper way and it is something that God has given his blessing, he will be present amongst you. So you're keeping it simple, just like I did. My prayer was simple that day. But also in this prayer and in thanking other people and celebrating, remember the big picture. Because one of the things that I said in this prayer is that, yes, we built this temple. Yes, God was there amongst us. But remember the bigger picture about God. He isn't just someone, a being that is there with you. He's also a being that is everywhere, that is way bigger than us. He also holds this universe together. So you keep these things together. You prepare yourself. You prepare everything about the building. You build it and then you celebrate afterwards, but you always keep your eyes on God. This is the key to success. The key to knowing where wisdom comes from, where the beginning of knowledge is always I keep my eyes on God. I try to always look at that. So what? What are some final remarks that I can leave you with today? Well, as you go about your way, as you go along through the world, look at the world and how it works. God has given us a magnificent university of the world. Look at the animals, the flowers. I spent time looking at ants back in my day, and I noticed, look how industrious these guys are. I looked at other animals, and they just simply did things. They gathered food, and they built their nests. They had their youngs. They did these because that is the way that God made them. They didn't try to change things. They just did it. Animals, plants, all these things focus intently on what God has made them to do. So, piece of advice for you. Spend time finding out what is it that God wants me to do. What is it that he wants me to do today, next week, the rest of my life, and focus on those things. Don't get caught up in other big dreams, other things. Always look back to nature. Remember, no matter how good looking you are, how nice you dress, all you got to do is walk out in the springtime into a field full of lilies and realize that you got nothing compared to what God has done. So, next, keep your mouth shut and learn from everyone and everything. This is a simple thing. Even a fool is not discovered if he keeps his mouth shut, right? Because the old saying, I don't know, maybe I wrote it, I don't know. People may suspect you're a fool, but if you keep your mouth shut, they won't be able to prove it. So keep your mouth shut. Don't prove that everyone's right. Know that all the knowledge in the world, all the knowledge in the world says the same thing, and you must eventually act. So look at myself when I built the temple. I prepared myself. I prepared everything for that. I went to God, but eventually I had to act and actually build the temple. And that's what I did. And we all must do that. We mustn't be afraid to, once we've done the proper work, the proper foundation is laid, to actually act and do something. When it comes back to acting, when it comes to acting on something, always go back to those first principles. What is something in itself? So I looked at it. It's a temple, right, where people could come and enjoy God's presence. And that was the guiding principle behind that. And then, of course, as you grow older and you accumulate things, remember that it's really the simple things in life that bring the greatest pleasures. There will be times for parties. There will be times for great festivals. But it's that day-to-day life that brings the true satisfaction, joy. Yes, you may enjoy this party. You may enjoy this trip for a period of time. But if that's all you ever do, you will find, like I did, that those things become hollow and empty of meaning. You think about great festivals and great food. Yes, it's good to have a steak. Yes, it's good to have these fancy things. But is there really anything better than a good bowl of stew on a cold day with some cornbread on the side? I know that's good because I just recently had it. So remember that these simple things are where true joy lies. All the shiny things in the world, all these other things that you think you might want, they don't compare in the long run to the simple things. Good food, good friends, some time spent at your house just hanging out. And when you get old, don't sit around and complain about the good old days. There never were really any good old days. Every day's the same. It's all the same, right? It's just a wheel going round and round. Now, there's different times in our life when we do different things, but there's no such thing as the good old days. Only difference between those days and these days are when you got up in the morning back then and you did something stupid, it didn't hurt as bad as it does today. So, finally, like I said, let me leave you with this parting word. When you don't know what to say, keep your mouth quiet, and that's what I'm going to do today. Right now, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to come here and speak to you, and I hope some of these words will bring you wisdom. Peace out and be excellent to one another.